to what they were calling the enterprise. Remember, in the opening statements, they were saying it was the inner circle, the bodyguards, trusted assistants. They actually went through and showed pictures to the jury today of various bodyguards, trying, I guess, we were talking about, to establish the enterprise. But then there was this moment, Jeremy, where she actually said on the stand, eventually it became a job for me. She's talking about planning these freak-offs. Eventually it became a job for me, to where I knew that if that is something that he wanted to do, I had the contacts to set it up and get a hotel room and all of that. And sometimes she'd even give deposits on her own personal credit card. So is she part of the enterprise or the victim of it?
Well, the defense is going to try to make her out to be part of this. She's not a victim. She's there willfully. She's getting this 10 contract or 10 record deal. This is what she's doing. And the prosecution in return is going to say, you know, you can white knuckle someone's neck with control. You can white knuckle their soul with control. And that's the control he had over her at all times. It was emotional. It was physical. But not only that, you're not going to just rely on her, because you're going to hear at some point, because we're just on day 2, you're going to hear from an expert who's going to explain why, in this particular case, a woman would come back. And this is why you have things like domestic violence law, that even if someone says, no, I don't want to proceed, there could be a reason why they don't, and it's that control and manipulation. But to your point, does that make out an entire organization, a criminal enterprise structured where you share that common goal and everyone has a role, and it leads up to that pinnacle of Sean Combs?
But how about, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's a lot that came out today that helped the defense in a very strange way. She said that this started out in the beginning of the relationship. She loved him, that the freak-offs were the only time she had to actually be with him. The prosecutor asked her, did you enjoy any of this? After she described being humiliated and disgusted, she said, well, it was the only time I got to be with him. I loved him. I wanted to make him happy.
She even said one-on-one, which of course the irony was they're always involved a third partner.
Yeah. They did, but she described this as he came to her, Sean Combs, and said, I'm interested in voyeurism. I want to have another man in the relationship. She described Sean Combs as, I am one of his girlfriends. I was jealous when he was with other women. And that goes very far to meet the defense's opening statement, which said, domestic violence is not sex trafficking. Yeah. Domestic violence is not racketeering. And if the defense can use these pieces of her testimony to show that this was a relationship, and the coercion, although she has testified to coercion, and that's part of the government's case, but was the business enterprise engaged in this coercion, or was there bad acts during the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, Kara, I want you to speak to what you saw in the courtroom, because when they showed pictures of people who were comprised of the so-called enterprise and talking about this, I mean, she was very familiar. She was fluent in the names of bodyguards and others who would remove property. She even talked about how they were on ready call to replenish and restore new linens, more candles, Glade and Diptyque of the variety, talking about more lubricants and baby oil, that they stood ready to always give drugs and everything else. Is that enough for them to, when they were talking about that, did the jurors react to that moment and think,
I mean, when she was giving a lot of her testimony, it was the typical tennis match. The jurors are watching her, they're watching the prosecutor, going back and forth. There was a point where I think the jurors were definitely still paying attention, but you know, there was part of this testimony was getting a bit repetitive. And even the judge at a sidebar outside of the presence of the jury had said he heard about 10 questions about baby oil, and like maybe it was time to move on.
For like 12 minutes it went on.
Yeah,
it's going to get mundane pretty quickly.
We learned a lot.
Well, talk to me about that though, because is there a point in time when it becomes for the jury overkill?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that narrative about the baby oil and the size of it and the temperature of it, we didn't really need to go that deep. But what they did need to establish from the prosecutor's perspective is how these freak-offs are orchestrated. And that's why you heard Cassie in her testimony say, well, yes, she was part of the planning. She's on Craigslist. She's reaching out for the escorts to be a part of it. But he always maintained the control and the direction, and that was all up to him. So those were some of the points. But Stacey, I think you made a great point. The defense has a lot of area to really attack here. And I think some of that vulnerability comes from her testimony where she says, well, I wanted to be with him. If I wasn't there, I thought somebody else might be there. So those are avenues for the defense to get in there on cross.
Is that enough to fatally undermine the prosecution's case? I mean, Jeremy, we've been prosecutors, right? And so I do not shop liver. But that does make a good point about what the defense can talk about. But they still got a lot in today about key players who were facilitating paid sex.
Absolutely, and as salacious as some of this testimony is and will be, they have to lay that foundation, and they're doing it through a pregnant woman who everyone can sympathize and empathize with, and you have to start that way, and practically speaking, you have to because she's going to have a child soon, but you have to start that way. But let's not also say that the government may not be overcharging, because they may very well be doing that, and you like to believe it's not true, but sometimes the government and the state overcharges because they can force or get that lesser plea, and that trafficking maybe of women or bringing them across state lines, and the events were happening in Ibiza, they were happening in Las Vegas, and all these different things were happening. But you have to start with something that maybe it isn't, and we discussed this yesterday, because it gets all that umbrella of information, and you get to all the kitchen sink in for that case in chief.
The kitchen sink, though, so the
But
kitchen sink's like
the
not
problem
appealing
is,
here, though,
like I said,
after a while,
it becomes
right?
overkill, and you
Right.
start to lose the jury, and they say, well, maybe
Right.
this is not what you're saying it is. It's something, but not this.
Right.
Well,
And
you know
also,
what, though?
can I just,
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to
Quick,
cut you
quick.
up, but one point that you made in the intro, in the beginning, is we're 2 days into testimony, and this jury has seen that assault video 5 times already. I mean, by the time you start playing it and playing it and playing it, it's sort of, look, it's a violent, horrible video, but eventually, what are they trying to achieve by overplaying the video? And I would say in my closing statement to the jury as a defense lawyer, why did they show you that video 5 times? Maybe there are going to be 5 more times throughout the course of the trial, because they're distracting you from the fact that what they charged him with is not really proven by the evidence. They just want to make him
may
as
not like
bad as
him, but
possible.
Let me
will
tell
not
you
commit
something.
that crime.
We have a lot more. Everyone stand by. There's a lot more to unpack. I got to tell you, the